وامنح الناس حبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك كن سموحا لخصمك تلقى خصمك أحبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك واحتفل بالمودة إنما
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. Welcome to another edition of the Sulaimaan Ravat show. This is a Freedom Day edition of the program. Yes, it's Freedom Day in South Africa, and many people see it as a long weekend. And in this particular long weekend, if you're taking Monday off, many see it as a prolonged long weekend. And I've made this point before, that when we have a public holiday in South Africa, or when we have a long weekend, people just see it as an opportunity to take time off, to socialize, spend more time with the family, have a community braai, or go out, or visit the people that you've been wanting to visit for quite some time. But all of that on its place, we have to remind ourselves about the significance behind these days. These days have been declared public holidays in our country for a reason. Now, Freedom Day, we know that all those years back in 1994, it was the first democratic elections here in South Africa, and it was a significant moment. It brought to an end a very dark period, many decades of discrimination, racial discrimination, oppression, suppression, persecution of non-white people in this country. So it was a huge occasion back in '94. It drew attention from all over the globe, if we can remember. And as I'm speaking, I'm sure you are starting to think back, where was I at that particular time? What was I doing? At what stage of my life was I? So we can personalize it, sure, but it has a broader context for our country. And today we want to take up a particular perspective in terms of our discussion in as far as Freedom Day is concerned. There were many people who fought a very important struggle, the liberation struggle in our country, to be able to bring apartheid to its knees. It took a lot of time. There was a lot of sacrifice. People lost wealth. People lost family. People lost their own lives. And it was that collective effort within the country, outside of the country, from those who were in exile, at differing levels, in differing ways, were put together. It finally brought the apartheid regime to its knees, and it brought us to that moment in 1994 when we had the first democratic election, where every South African citizen who was eligible to vote could go and vote. It was not a matter of race. It was not a matter of background, etc. But we have to acknowledge those people who played that part. I mean, we have so many millennials now in our communities, people who were born in the late 80s, born in the 90s, who don't know much about that history. There are many people who would be watching this program who perhaps were too young to remember what happened in '94, because time is progressing quite quickly, and the years are going by. We're already now reaching the quarter-century mark almost since that particular date back in 1994. So who were the people who played a part in terms of ensuring that we could see that particular day? The famous names are well known, and justifiably so. Your Nelson Mandelas, your O.R. Tambos, your Albertina Sisulus, and the list goes on. And they are spoken about quite often. Their names are entrenched in the narrative when it comes to the liberation struggle, when it comes to the fight for equality, for a free and an equal South Africa. But there are many others who played a very important role. Their names are known in some circles, but really, to do justice, we need to discuss them more often. And we need to acknowledge their contribution to the struggle, their sacrifice, that of the individuals themselves and their families, so that we have a broader understanding of what happened in those days, and a broader understanding of the people that played a key role and contributed significantly. Now, on that note, we are dedicating this program, this Freedom Day edition of the program, to discussing the life of the late Dr. Abubakar Asvat. It's a name that is well known. He had the title of the People's Doctor. He struggled. He went into the heart of the townships, as we would call it, and he could have, like many other doctors, chosen a different path, which would have resulted in greater financial rewards for him and his family, which would have resulted in greater stability in his life and security in his life. But he chose to do that which in his opinion and in his view was more important, to go and help those people who were most in need, even though it came at a financial cost, and it came at the ultimate cost eventually, where he lost his life. A very tragic story, but a very inspirational story indeed. And we need to talk about his life story to acknowledge his role, but also to take inspiration and to understand our history. Joining us in studio this evening on the program, we have Brother Alauddin Ali Osmani. He is from the Abu Bakr Aswad Institute, and the institute is focused on nation building. He's a board member and he is the official spokesperson for the institute. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the program.
Wa alaikum salam, jazakallah. Thank you very much for the opportunity to you and to the listeners that and the viewers that tune into your program.
Firstly, if I may start on a somewhat personal note, when did you first meet the late Dr. Abu Bakr Aswad, and what was your relationship with him?
I need to tell you that quite seriously that we started off in a very acrimonious fashion.
Oh, okay.
And we established very good relationships thereafter. But the acrimony being that we found ourselves at a point, and it was from a cricketing perspective.
All right.
We were playing what you would have called normal sports. That was under the people that had found themselves conveniently within the framework of the apartheid sport structure. And because of that, we were virtually on the opposite sides of each other. Obviously, they were as well at a certain point in the same space that we were as cricketers. And then they moved on after having realized that, you know, the discrimination is at a point that is so bad that it cannot continue, and also that we needed to form a buffer against the apartheid sport structures. And with the result that they kept on trying to put pressure on those that were so-called on the other side of the fence. And eventually it worked. You know, in 1976, the cricket club that I played for then, Queensland Cricket Club, we then crossed over into the anti-apartheid structures. And as coincidence would have it, our very first game was against Crescent's Cricket Club.
Okay, and that was Dr. Aswad's
and that was Dr. Aswad's team. And Dr. Aswad was the wicket keeper. And I distinctly recollect that when I came in to bat, he was the wicket keeper, and he would stand at the back of the stumps and say, "Now you're going to find out just how rosy it was on the other side." You know? And so yes, that being what it happened on the sports field. But after that, we built a strong and healthy relationship. Yes, there were robust times when we deliberated in various meetings of the cricket associations and our respective clubs from the perspective of guiding our sport to the point of understanding that there needed to be this acceptance of no normal sports in an abnormal society. And we had to create the space by which we could conscientize younger people and being able to do that. So the robust debates might have continued, but there was always this focus that remained, that we had to do this work.
Now, I've done a bit of reading, and my understanding that he also, his history goes back to the good old Fitas.
That's correct, yes,
Yeah.
That's correct. His history goes back to the good old Fitas. He played at the time in Fitas, he did play a lot of sports. He was academically well inclined. I just learned not too long ago from a family member of mine that my late dad, was in fact the ustad of all the Aswad boys. So in that sense, I feel particularly very happy to know that somehow there was this relationship, and that between them, there was this interaction, and hopefully that knowledge was something that had benefited the family from whichever perspective.
Just for the benefit of the viewers, your dad's name, and I think he was associated with the Newtown Masjid in those days.
Jamaluddin Osmani, he was associated with the Offerton Madrasa.
Okay.
But over and above that, several places throughout the country, in Brits, in Wolmeranstad, and so on, until eventually with the Sabri Madrasa in Lenasia, the original Sabri Chisti.
Would it be correct to say that the activist within Dr. Abu Bakr Aswad kind of got activated when he went to study in Pakistan? Because the history in that part of the world at the time was quite interesting from a political perspective. And then you had many South Africans there, and Pakistan, I understand, had almost become a kind of gateway for people passing through, South Africans. And there was a lot of political discourse taking place at that time. Can you perhaps elaborate and shed more light on that?
Yes, very clearly. There was this conduit which was available to our people in places like Pakistan and other places. But let me go back to the fact of why Dr. Abu Bakr Azvat and a number of other people had chosen to take this route or were forced into taking this route. There was a time in this country that was so horrendous to understand that here there were people that were academically well inclined to go to universities of their choice. And yet, having selected the university of their choice, found suddenly that you had to apply to the Minister of Interior to grant you status to be able to be accepted at those institutions. And it's a credit to the family that they said they don't want to go that route. Why do they need to apply to the apartheid state to have one of their sons having to be educated in that fashion where it would almost seem like they were doing him a favor? And for that reason, a number of people chose then to take this conduit that was available to them and go out to places like Pakistan. And yes, he did go to Pakistan, and he met a lot of, he interacted with his older brothers, and also others that had come from this country. And there they developed this conscientization while studying in Pakistan to understand and give them a feeling of what was actually happening in their own country at home, and that they would one day have to return, and the fact that they had to face was what would they face when they returned. So they had to acclimatize themselves already before getting back here to know what kind of challenges they would face getting back here.
I actually read somewhere, I don't know if you are in the loop on this one, that when he returned to South Africa, he was actually questioned by apartheid authorities who had who had got wind of the fact that these guys had become politically active whilst in Pakistan.
Yes, this is a story which I'm not too close to, but they were interrogated to a point. Why did you go? What did you do? Who did you meet? And so on. And as life would have it, I'm quite firm in the belief that somewhere along the way they were probably now on what I would call a list, the same way that today there's a list that operates for terrorists around the world as a debatable thing. But surely there might have been a list that existed within the framework of the security establishment in the country at a point to say, here are people that are coming from outside and they need to be watched for whatever reason. But Dr. Azvat, when he arrived, he found himself in a space where he said, I need to do something for my people. With the result, he applied for work at the old Coronation Hospital, which is now the Rahima Musa Hospital as we know it. And he applied and worked at that hospital. But when he got to this hospital, he found conditions so bad that black people were receiving treatment that was worse than the treatment that you would give to people that you don't wish existed. And he found the systems were very poor. And when he questioned these systems, it automatically got to a point where he was pressurized into submitting his resignation. And being the person that he was, he took it upon himself. He said, no, I'm not going to just sit back and accept the resignation. I'm going to go out there and serve the people that are being marginalized, the people that require the health services of us. I'm trained as a medical doctor. I'm trained to deliver service to humanity. And for that reason, I'm going to go out there and make a difference.
On that point, we'll take a quick break. When we come back, inshallah, we continue talking about the life of the late Dr. Abu Bakr Azvat. Welcome back. So it's Freedom Day here in South Africa, and we're talking about the life of the late Dr. Abu Bakr Azvat. The purpose behind this program, as I said earlier on, is to acknowledge those lesser known people. And when I say lesser, I mean simply in terms of media coverage, in terms of the general narrative as far as the list of those people who contributed to the struggle in South Africa. There are many people that need more recognition and more acknowledgement in terms of the part that they played and the sacrifice that they made. And Dr. Abubakar Asvat, the late, is definitely high up on that list. And in studio we have Brother Alauddin Ali Osmani from the Abubakar Asvat Institute for Nation Building. And we're talking about his life and the lessons that we can learn therefrom. Right, so he's back in South Africa. He takes up the first job. He's pressurized into resigning. I read somewhere that he took on one of the pharmaceutical reps who refused to talk to black patients or to black doctors. Now he decides to go it on his own in the heart of Soweto and to take it up as a calling rather than a means of earning a healthy and a comfortable living. Take us a little bit through that period in his life, the people's doctor. How did it lead to him earning that title?
His brother got him associated with a surgery in Rockville in Soweto. And also there was, he had to do a stint in Kliptown at the same time. What transpired was that having taken over that surgery in Rockville, he was settled among the poorest of the poor people. And he'd opened his doors at the surgery and not having to sit there and having to record how many people were paying and how many people were not paying. And he found that here there was a serious shortage of primary health care, number one, and number two, a serious shortage of medication and those kind of things that had to go with it. In a larger sense, in doing this stint in Soweto and in Kliptown, he realized that there was something more that had to be added to this equation. So at great cost to himself, till today people actually wonder, how did this chap, as a doctor, go around finding medicines, finding blankets, finding tents whenever people needed it, and how did he access all these things? It was almost like, you know, was he a magician? But he resourced all these things on his own and through his network of people that he had gathered around him, a whole set of volunteers. And a lot of these people had worked among their networks and started to access things. And it's a credit to them that with this network, they were able to give great service to the poorest of the poor. There, people will record that he never charged them a cent. Very poor people, pensioners, who could not afford medication or could not afford to see the doctor, understand that there were serious diseases like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, and quite serious ailments that affected the community, which were being ignored at the community health centers, which were controlled by the apartheid system at the time. And the health system during the apartheid system, I mean, it is an open book, that there was very little in terms of serious intervention towards improving the health of the black communities. So he found himself in a very good space. He found himself in a space where he had to make great sacrifices. And there were times when he would take his family out to these places to go and administer to the poorest of the poor. Having to go out on weekends when he could have spent the weekend playing cricket, for example. He sacrificed some of those cricket matches to find that he needed to fulfill a stint because rain had affected his work on a Saturday or on a weekday, and he had to fulfill a clinic at a certain point. He went to what was then known as chicken farms and other places. He bought a caravan, which he carted around, and a little trailer. And the caravan and trailer followed him all over the country. He went to places like Polokwane. With the late Winnie Mandela, he established a center in Brandfort, where she was exiled to. And he worked also with the communities in Brandfort. He established an organization called CHAP, which was the Community Health Awareness Project. And I don't have that document handy, But there are people that worked with him like Rueda Halim, Mike Tesong and others who would also have to take credit for a large part of the work that went on. And that document became the document among the black townships and the people that were delivering basic healthcare services for them to be able to follow this pattern that Dr. Abu Bakr Aswad had set in order to deliver quality service to the people that actually were so marginalized that they depended totally on him. That is why he became the people's doctor. He did not care about his greatness as a doctor or that he would amass great wealth from being a qualified doctor. He stuck rigidly to his oath of having to give service to people. And that's where he was.
I understand he also then appointed Albertina Sisulu as his nurse at a time when nobody wanted to employ her.
That's absolutely correct. And there were tensions within the ANC camp and within the Azapo camp, knowing that he served on the Azapo Health Secretariat. He was the Secretary for Health in Azapo, and he was a very senior leader in Azapo. Make no mistake about that. And there were simmering tensions in the townships, and he achieved the respect across the board of all political factions to say, no, he was not, as much as he was inclined to Azapo, he was a black consciousness leader in the community, and he was specifically and only focused on wanting to deliver services to the people, regardless of their political affiliation. And with that in mind, and it's a credit to the late Albertina Sisulu that she said no. She would stick to her guns because having to deliver services to the people did not mean you need to be from a certain political background to be able to accomplish this task.
I also read somewhere that he continued to drive that 1972 model Datsun right up to his death.
Absolutely, and I think it is a pity that there were no photographs or actual videos taken at the time. But as I said, when we first crossed the floor to play cricket, Dr. Aswad, as the president then of the Transvaal Cricket Board, would himself show you where the cricket mat was placed. As you know, we had hardened wickets which were of compacted soil, and you need to lay a coir mat over the wicket to be able to play. And the mat was then picked up and dropped off at certain places. So the first time we went with him, he came with this little car of his, and he said, you guys must pick up this mat. And we picked up the mat, and we put it on top of his car. And he drove us to the field and said, okay, now you chaps need to take it off and roll it off. And that was the president of the Transvaal Cricket Board having to do that. So that car, it was a vehicle recognized anywhere that he went. And he could have driven the best of vehicles in his lifetime. He could have, if I recollect, at the time of his death, he drove a Cressida, a Toyota Cressida.
Yes.
When people in a similar category as his were already at a point where they were driving fancy luxury limousines, and I will not take it away from them, but yes, he did it at great sacrifice, and not to want to seek a platform for himself, never.
So you had Dr. Aswad, the doctor, and you spoke quite eloquently about that and how he became the people's doctor. Then he was also the sportsman, quite involved in especially cricket. But beyond just serving people via his profession, he also had a broader political kind of vision. I read somewhere that when he was given an award by the Indicator newspaper at some point, he delivered a speech to the residents of Lenasia, and he said that, there's just one bridge dividing Lens from Soweto. Whilst there may not be hostilities between the residents of Lens and the residents of Soweto, why do we see each other as the other? Why don't we cross that bridge and start mingling with each other? So he wanted to see that kind of rainbow nation which became a reality, to some extent anyway, much later.
Yes, at the Indicator Human Rights Award, and prior to that he was accredited by the Star newspaper, which is a little known fact that the Star awarded him the Community Leader Award, whichever way it was, and I have yet to find the record of that from their archives. But the fact that the Indicator awarded him, on that same evening he made the speech that Lens needed to swarm Soweto, Soweto needed to swarm Lenasia, and vice versa with El Dorado Park and others. He said we could not wait for liberation to come, because once liberation came, we would find it very hard to, in his words, to untangle the damage that oppression and suppression of the people had actually been carried to that point. And this resonated a lot with the people, and it particularly resonated with us as the Institute when we were formed in 2004. And we found that the appropriate way was when we realized that here is an ideal opportunity. There's this road that crosses over between the communities of Lenasia and Soweto, and we needed to use this as the symbolic fulfillment of that premise, that vision of Dr. Asvat that said we need to swarm each other and be able to mingle and build this bridge between each other. After all, these are artificial barriers. Race, so-called race, is an artificial barrier. We're all part of one big human race. And we needed to see that from his perspective as that being the case in point.
Where did he get the nickname Hurley?
I have searched a lot, and I've also spoken to my close colleagues. Some of them allude to the fact that it might have been that he would almost like preach to them.
Okay.
There was an archbishop, if I recollect at the time, Archbishop Hurley. I forget his surname at the point, but Archbishop Hurley, and because they found him trying to give the same kind of rhetoric to conscientize people, and I think he picked up that name. That's the indications that I get from some of my colleagues that tell me that. And the fact that black consciousness, led by him, and his setting up in a Zapo structure in Lenasia is phenomenal, because out of nothing, Lenasia had an Zapo structure that was led here by Comrade Abu Bakr Hurley Asvat, and all these other people that he built up around him, like people you would find that are little mentioned, like Sadiq Variava, who, for example, spent some time in prison with Steve Biko, and a whole lot of others like that. So he built up quite an important cell which made important contributions to the struggle at the time.
Why is it that he doesn't get the prominence that he deserves in terms of the anti-apartheid struggle narrative? Yes, you and I both reside in Lenasia. I mean, our homes are a stone throw away from his home. I was in school with all of his 3 kids. They were in different classes. I think Hasina was probably in the same class as I was. So we would know him. The residents of Lenasia would know him. Yes. Perhaps the broader reef here in Gauteng. But in terms of the national narrative, is it because he was more aligned with Azapo, or is it that the list is just so long that many people who deserved more recognition for their struggle and efforts just didn't end up getting it in the last decade or 2 decades and a half that has passed since democracy?
It is a thing which the Institute itself has been questioning for some time now. We have this belief, and realistically so, that there are lots and lots of struggle heroes that were not mentioned anywhere, not given a claim, and they made serious contributions and laid the foundations for this democracy to be able to be accomplished. These people have never been mentioned, and part of our goal when we wanted the road naming to happen is that we would have established memorial parks on either side of the road. And these memorial parks, as far as the Institute is concerned, is still an unfinished project. And it was meant largely for us to be able to recognize those unsung heroes and heroines of the time, to be able to have their plaques or their names put there so people can go by and say, you know what, this is one of my family members. That is somebody I know. That is somebody I went to school with, for example. But for a strange reason, I think part of it is probably also a media hype, where a large part of it is picked up because the ANC were predominant in a larger sense. But if one looks at it, also the PAC were, in our opinion, sidelined. If you looked at people like Robert Sobukwe, for example, who, if one read his works, I mean, you would find so much of intellectual capacity there for political leadership. And the same would apply to Steve Biko, for example. And now people find it opportune. For example, it was strange to find that here there were people suddenly, like Jacob Zuma, for example, in his presidency, he was quoting fairly recently from the life of Steve Biko and others. So they have made their contributions. Why do you fail to acknowledge them? And this is an opportunity. I think the ANC needs to come to the party and look for these people, and as its own initiative say, yes, there were people that did exactly what we have done, and they need to be acclaimed for the work that they've put
Indeed. And I think that's one of the reasons that we're doing the program today on the life of the late Dr. Abubakar Asvat, and the program coincides with Freedom Day. We need to acknowledge these people from within our communities who don't get that media coverage, their life story, their struggle, their efforts, but they indeed made great sacrifice and contributed significantly. Time again for a break. When we come back, we continue. Welcome back. So this year on Freedom Day on the program, we're talking about the life of the late Dr. Abubakar Asvat and his great contribution through the struggle effort here in South Africa, the people's doctor, how he selflessly served the poorest of the poor in Soweto and paid the ultimate price in the end and lost his life. Our guest in studio from the Abubakar Asvat Institute for Nation Building is Brother Alauddin Ali Osmani. Now we get to the very tragic part. I can remember as a youngster, I mean, his death, his tragic death, his killing kind of just overwhelmed all of Lenasia and surrounds and beyond. And people were in a kind of like a daze, almost a state of shock. I remember at the Impala school where I was schooling and his children were schooling, even the teachers were like shocked. No one knew how to react, what to do. It was at the tail end of the apartheid era, but it was horrific nonetheless. So what are your memories, in terms of your recollection? How did it unfold? What happened?
I can tell you that it came when the word filtered through, and it came quite fast that he had been shot and he had ceased to exist. The fact that he had passed on in such a tragic manner came to the entire community as a complete shock. That to find that here there was somebody who was so close to the people, to find, excuse me, that in the service of the people, his life had been terminated. And people found that very, very difficult to accept. I mean, I remember for a fact that on that very day, as the news came to me when I tried to get to the house, I mean, in that short space of time, I mean, in under an hour, I mean, there were so many people and there were so many vehicles that had come, and that whole area had been kind of blocked off, and people were walking around in a total daze and state of shock, still not accepting the fact that Dr. Abubakar Asvat had passed on. And it's sad that his death was so untimely because he had made such big contributions, and there was still so much left that we believed he could have contributed to develop not only the health sector. So question marks remain. There are many questions that remain unanswered, and I think it is perhaps a fact to mention that it is difficult to find that the family to this day find it difficult, and there is no real closure for the family. The question marks remain in the public space, and it's not for us at this moment. I think I'll respect the sensitivities of the family and not elaborate on it. However, one thing does remain, is that here there were people that had come to his surgery on that day and held a vigil from the time that they had learned of his passing. And they held a vigil till the time that he was actually buried, which was the next day. The reason for the funeral being held the next day, there were all organizations that implored the family that people were actually traveling from very far places to be able to be given the opportunity to attend his funeral. It resulted in masses and masses of people coming by bus, by car, people walked, took public transport and arrived there. And there was no opportunity for the hearse to transport his body across the road. He was carried, his funeral was virtually transported on the shoulders of people from Lens across the road to the Avalon Cemetery. So you can imagine the outpouring of grief. It was at not just at a local level, it was at a national level.
I understand that they say in Lenasia to date it was the largest funeral scene in Lens.
Absolutely, without doubt. Without doubt, there's never been an event like that. I stand corrected. There are many other people that have also fulfilled very, very important roles in the community, but there's yet to be such a profound impact on the community that actually created this massive, massive outpouring of grief.
All right, we take one more break. When we come back, we'll wrap up the discussion. Welcome back to the Freedom Day edition of the Sulaimaan Ravat Show. We are talking about the life, the struggle, the efforts and the contribution of the late Dr. Abubakar Asvat. In studio with us, Brother Alauddin Ali Osmani from the Abubakar Asvat Institute for Nation Building. Now, in terms of you spoke, and I mean, I could sense the emotion in your voice with regards to his demise. Until now, you say that the family don't have closure because there's just so many question marks as to what happened. And I suppose that speculation will just continue and Allah knows best. But for the family on the one hand and also for the community of activists in Lenasia and surrounds, how big a setback was it and how did they start to overcome that?
You know, I believe to this day, those people that were closely associated with him have not overcome that, because of the impact that he personally had on their lives and the fact that he conscientized so many people. And because of the nature of him as a person and the nature of the projects and the work that he was engaged in, he gave so much of himself that people found it hard to raise themselves to that level. He had set a very high bar for activism in the community. And to a limited extent, I believe that the Abubakar Asvat Institute committed itself to be able to fulfill that task. And I'm hoping that as we go along, we have, to a larger extent, been able to fulfill that kind of legacy that was left behind by the late Dr. Asvat. And I'm hoping that it will continue forever and a day until we can make, well, not just an impact on our society, but to the point where the work that we do can impact and humanity can benefit out of our interactions and the programs that we run. At
the time of his demise, I mean, there were tributes from very senior figures in the struggle. Yes. I've heard, I don't know if it's correct, that even Nelson Mandela penned a letter at the time?
Yes, Nelson Mandela. There were numerous other very, very, very prominent people that had penned letters about their respect for the work that he did.
Talk to us a little bit about the foundation. You mentioned that it started in 2004. How did it get going? What was the thought process behind it? And what have been some of the initiatives and projects since the establishment of the Institute?
The Institute largely came about as a result of the friends of the late Dr. Asvat that worked with him, his friends, associates, close colleagues. And they felt that they needed to further the work that he did, and thus the Institute came into being. And they looked at various elements of the work that he did, like in the health sector, and how they could further the work in sports. His belief that we needed to take sports to the poorest of the poor. There was this elitist view that cricket was only being played by the whites and those that could actually afford it in the various other communities and the marginalized black communities. One, for the fact that there were very few green spaces available to the black communities at the time because of the so-called apartheid separate development nodes that were being established by the apartheid government, and that there was very few opportunities for them to develop as sports people. In the health sector, there was very little in terms of primary health care that was actually going out to the people. And we felt that we needed to find an opportunity to engage with relevant people and stakeholders to be able to create a mechanism by which the work that he started could actually continue. And then there was the thing about having to make an impact on the youth. So if I might start somewhere and tell you that we started what we would call a cricket project. It's a project that runs once a year. And we bring cricketers from the marginalized townships we have to a point, and we have also engaged with the private white schools, if I might call it, for clarity. The private white schools, their teams initially were brought in just to have a measure of knowing how well the black African children were doing as against their counterparts in the so-called white independent schools. And there was a huge, huge gap that we found. And to be able to address that gap, we then, thanks to certain people like Jomo Saluji and the late Mohammed Jajbai, who then became the CEO at the Gauteng Cricket Board, that they embraced the cricket project and said, yes, we must make it an official calendar project of the Gauteng Cricket Board. It's still not at the level that Gauteng Cricket Board should be supporting. We are very grateful that we had a sponsorship, a corporate sponsorship developed, if I might mention, at the time through Sunday Times. And they came to the party in a marvelous way that helped us to set this project on the move. And right up to the 10th anniversary, Sunday Times were our partners. But also, credit must go to people, ordinary business people at the local community level that have helped us out with providing juices, drinks, meals, and a lot of those things. Some of those have come with small cash donations, which we've been able to buy prizes and things. And we've then managed to, through our resources, been able to get cricket equipment and that for some of those communities. But a real success story is that we, in an area like Orange Farm, where there was no cricket project at all, they came on and they played in the Abu Bakr Aswat Memorial Tournament. They had no white clothes. They had, some of them had shoes, some of them didn't have shoes, and they played. But it's a credit to the fact that we engaged with them and their resilience to be able to overcome difficulties, which is part of what we do, is to create self-reliance in communities.
Yeah.
And the self-reliance that we created in this community, they embraced it fully and created a structure within them that today Orange Farm have got a recognized structure by engagement with the Abu Bakr Aswat tournament, and they have got teams that now play officially in the Gauteng Cricket Board. So they have just had a proper cricket field established also in Orange Farm that will be unveiled in the coming cricket season. We're struggling with an area that has come to us for assistance. It's going to be very difficult, an area, a very poor area on the west end called Poortjie. They are like what you would call new kids on the block. But we're trying to engage and see if we can get the Gauteng Cricket Board to try and be a catalyst for trying to help that community on that side. But until then, when we do not see proper transformation, where facilities are brought closer to the people that need it, where expertise is not brought closer to the people that need it, they don't need this expertise to be given to them at the Wanderers, at the academies in Pretoria. Why can't we bring these places closer to the people where they are, create more green spaces? A serious difficulty we have is that the Lenstek grounds, as you know it, you as a young boy must have played there. Many people have played there and developed their sporting skills there. It is a shame that the African National Congress Council and the current Democratic Alliance Council, we're trying to seek a meeting with the mayor to find out what is it that they are so intransigent about not wanting to fix up this facility. And yet we host this tournament there with a unique setup that has got 8 fields where we can play 8 fixtures at a time. And yet they drag their feet. You cannot find them wanting to take this thing seriously. The thing about social engineering in the community, it seems like it's absent.
We have about a minute or so before we wrap up. I just want to ask you to conclude on this note. What would you say are one or two of the greatest lessons that we can take from the life of the late Dr. Abu Bakr Asvat?
The greatest lesson we can take is selflessness and the thing about anti-racism, anti-sexism, anti-sectarianism. These are things which are barriers which limit our movement towards each other, our interaction towards each other. I give you, for example, I mean, from a Muslim perspective, one would find it difficult to suddenly be facing a fact that says, excuse me, you know, the way we see things, is Islam in South Africa just predominantly for the Indian and Pakistani Muslims? And you would find it difficult to try and answer that kind of question and say, no, it's not. Islam is for everybody. So in a similar vein, our service to people is something which we should give voluntarily of ourselves. So what we take back from Abu Bakr Asvat as a doctor is service, volunteerism, and last but not least, to find that you do not remain aloof from those people that actually need your assistance. If I might conclude on a shorter note, very quickly about two aspects of our institute, is that we run a youth project, and we're engaging with the schools in our areas. We're taking these youngsters on visits to teach them about anti-racism. We've already done things on bullying, on drug abuse, on teenage pregnancies with these young kids, and they've gone out and taken this education back to their schools. I'm appealing to people, you know, on this day of Freedom Day, set your minds free, set yourself free, tell your children to engage with us. We have got, if I might use the correct term, black African children predominantly, but they're coming from schools in Lenasia, Nirvana Secondary, Trinity Secondary. We're asking those very children, the Lenasia Muslim school children, come to these programs, they will benefit you. They will seriously benefit you, your outlook will change, and you will seriously be able to contribute to improving the landscape in this country and make a real impact and the difference where the work that you do will be respected.
Brother Alauddin, Jazakumullah for your time. We really appreciate it.
Shukran. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I thank your
wa
viewers as well. Thank you very much.
Right, that brings to an end this program on Freedom Day. Yes, we were paying tribute to the late Dr. Abu Bakr Asvat. Until next time, inshallah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
كن سموحا لخصمك تلقى خصمك أحبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك واحتفل بالمودة وامنح الناس حبك